Okay, so today's lecture is starting our memory unit. We're going to learn about information processing. And there are three main stages, which we'll go over, but today we're going to focus on encoding. So we're going to do the simple lecture just like we normally do. There's notes that you can take, and if you have questions, you can email me. All right, so first slide, basic steps of memory. There are three steps. The first is encoding. So this is getting information into the memory system. So taking information in to go into your brain and hopefully make it into storage, which is the retention or keeping of encoded information in memory over time. And then finally retrieval, which is the process of getting information out of memory storage. It's very simple. An example would be reading an article, is you encoding the information from the article. Putting those facts into permanent storage is what storage is. And then finally, retrieval would be recalling those facts when taking a quiz or writing a paper about the article. Next slide. So to talk about encoding is to talk about a lot of different vocabulary, which is why you have a vocabulary activity at the end of this lecture. To start with, you have automatic processing. So this is the unconscious processing of encoding information. The major examples are space, time, and frequency. You often are automatically able to remember space in terms of where things are much easier than what that information actually is. So you might have noticed this if you're taking a quiz and you can remember reading it in the book, but you can't actually get the actual information, but you remember where it was in the book that you read it. So that's automatic. Effortful processing is when encoding requires attention. So that's actually remembering the real information, and you have to really pay attention and you have to practice. The psychological term for practice is rehearsal. And it is exactly what it sounds like. The purposeful repetition of information, you rehearse it over and over and over. That saying, practice makes perfect, they're talking about rehearsal. And then additionally, from rehearsal, you can have overlearning. So this is when you continue to rehearse information even after memorization. So your easy example for that would be practicing a musical instrument. You learn how to read the music and play the instrument, but if you forget to practice, you'll lose it. You need to continuously play in order to maintain your high skill. Next slide. So when it comes to encoding, there's some more concepts that go along with it. You have serial position effect. So that is talking about when you have to remember a lot of different things and they're given to you basically in a list. And you all know this is true. You have a tendency to remember the first thing you heard and the last thing. Okay, and that is just natural. There's two effects that go with it. Primary effect, which is remembering the first because you have more chances to practice it. So if you're introduced to a bunch of people at a party, they say, this is Allie, and this is Riley, and this is Amanda. You'll go, all right, Allie, Riley, Amanda. And then they introduce 5 more people, and you'll start again, Allie, Riley, Amanda, Jen, and then you'll remember the first 3 because you have more time to practice them, because you, with each new name, you repeat the first. The other effect is called the recency effect. Think most recent. You remember the last item because it's what's fresh in your mind. And those two effects work together for the serial position effect, that you remember items first and last within a list. Another factor that affects your encoding is the spacing of rehearsal. So that's how much time there is between your rehearsal sessions, or how often you practice, or how often you study the information. And you all know this. The one that your teachers always tell you to do, that you never do, is distributed rehearsal, where you spread out the sessions. Oh, you don't have any homework tonight? Maybe take 15 minutes and look over your psych notes. And we say this over and over and over, and you never do it. Instead, you prefer massed rehearsal, which is fewer, longer sessions. We know that as cramming. And there are many studies that have proven time and again that mass rehearsal is not nearly as effective as distributed rehearsal. The next slide is about semantic encoding. We know that when we are able to link information to other understandings, other meanings, the encoding works better. Okay, when you encode information without meaning, that's stuff like acoustic encoding, so how the words sound. So it might be you ask someone, if you're getting them to remember a list of words, you ask them what other words does the one you have to remember rhyme with. Okay. Visual encoding is the same thing, how the words look. So do you know any other 3-letter words that will help you remember, and you're trying to associate those, but they don't really mean anything. We know that when there is semantic encoding, you have greater chance of retrieving that information much easier. Encoding imagery is probably the one you're most familiar with. This is when you connect images with images and videos with concepts. So the textbook example was for the images you saw, well, you didn't see, but the other people saw for 9/11, and how you can see the Twin Towers, and it will bring back all the memories of that time. Maybe for some of you, it might be if you find an old picture of your ex, and all of a sudden you'll remember many things, whether those are good or bad or filled with rage. But the image brings up the memory for you, makes it easier to retrieve that information. When it comes to semantic encoding, there are tricks you can do to help give meaning to concepts. And that's known as mnemonic devices, which many of you have heard before, and that's just a memory trick or technique to help retrieve that encoded information. The two that are listed in your textbook are method of Loci and peg word system. So method of Loci is just about basically giving in an imaginary place or an imaginary situation to help you remember the concept. So a long time ago, I talked to you about how when I have to remember that hippocampus is about memory, I always imagine a hippo walking across a college campus where he is learning and remembering things. The hippo is not real, and neither is the college that he goes to. So it's all imaginary, but it makes it easy for me to remember the hippocampus is where memory is stored. The other mnemonic device mentioned is the peg word system. So this is when you hang items on words you already know. So the example that they give in the book is like if you rhyme the numbers with images, they give an image of like 1 is bun, and 2 is shoe, and 3 is tree. Those don't mean anything, but they rhyme, so you'll remember them. So, for example, if you needed to remember that Josephine is older than Henry, you would picture in your head Josephine wearing a bun and Henry wearing shoes. So 1 bun, 2 shoe, Josephine, then Henry. Okay. Obviously the peg word system is much more advanced and hard to do than method of Loci, but it's also more effective if practiced a lot. Okay. All right, and our last slide for today is about organizing information. Sometimes just how you present it to your brain makes it easier to learn. So the big one is chunking. This is when you take a lot of information and you're going to chunk it into easier to remember items. So the example you can see on the slide is the first row has a whole bunch of letters that don't mean anything. And then the second row has the phrase, ask not what your country can do for you. The first row and the second row all have the same letters. You've just organized them so they spell something out. And you do this all the time when you make the acrostic bookmark. You remember in like second grade, and it was like for mom, magnificent, outstanding, another M word. It's the same thing. We organize it. The one that people always talk about is homes, for the 5 lakes, the Great Lakes. For you have Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. And the last way you can also organize information is through hierarchy, and that's the relationships between pieces of information. So you organize them to say how they are connected, which ones are more important than the others. If you are trying to remember the dates in a historical setting, you might focus them all around what person was in charge and how he or she was connected to the rebellions and the church and the plague and such things. But you basically create your own little concept map. So pretty simple concepts, hopefully, now that I've explained them, but all a bunch of different vocab. So that's all I have for you today. Next class, we're going to talk about the next step, which is storage and maybe retrieval. Or sorry, storage and then retrieval. So for today, that was it. So if you have any questions, you can email me, but I think you should be good. Use your